Good job, team. We are getting back to work here. Okay, now what we would like to do is move it to a national perspective. So to talk about the impacts perhaps nationally, Miles, please.
Thank you so much. Can y'all hear me? Is this y'all on back? Okay, much better. Good morning. It's still morning. And thank you for having me. My name is Miles Keogh. I'm the Executive Director of the National Association of Clean Air Agencies. I really appreciate the invitation to come out to California and have a conversation with y'all today that explores the national perspective of what's going on with clean cars, CAFE, the SAFE rule, California's authority, et cetera. And I don't know why everyone's complaining about the weather. I did notice that what's outside is San Francisco is just the way y'all described it would be. So I appreciate, thank you for laughing at that. Man, I was worried for a sec there. I appreciate your hospitality. Also, if there's any need for simultaneous translation while I operate my native accent, please just let me know. So let me start by saying who NACA is. The National Association of Clean Air Agencies is a nonprofit, nonpartisan association that brings together state and local air pollution control agencies from around the country. I really enjoyed hearing what Ms. Taylor said earlier today and really learned a lot from her presentation. But one thing I wanted to just mention was she noticed that there were some political tensions around this rule, that there may be advantages for red states or for blue states or the like. And unfortunately, fortunately, I'm happy and sad to say that for NACA, we don't see this as a political issue in the slightest. We have red states and blue states, red cities and blue cities, political leadership from all political denominations, and your lungs don't care who you voted for. So for NACA, this is not a red state or blue state issue. NACA exists to advance the protection of clean air and public health and to improve the capability and effectiveness of state and local air agencies. Our members, as you can see from this map, include 155 of the country's 177 state and local air pollution control agencies, including a number in California, CARB and the local AQMDs. And we use the collective experience of these agencies to raise a voice for policy that protects the health of Americans everywhere from air pollution. The way we do this is focused around 13 committees that we operate that bring together the state and local experts, and they focus on everything from agriculture to air toxics. So one of the things that we do is we file comments when agencies produce proposals and when there's legislation that has an impact on our ability to advance clean air and protect public health. So we did this when the SAFE rule came out. Let me just back up a sec. As you can see from this map, our comments in a highly politicized environment in Washington, D.C. need to be fairly apolitical. They need to be fairly technical. So it's very difficult for us to take any kind of position that is political. And so our comments on this, which were put together by our Mobile Sources Committee, which is capably co-chaired by Eric White from Placer County and by the state of New York, put together comments along with our Global Warming Committee, which also is chaired by a Californian, Alberto Ayala from Sacramento, our Quality Management District, and by the state of Washington. Those folks put together these comments, which this slide gives you if you want to take a nap for the rest of my presentation, this is what the comments said, Cliff Notes. We opposed the proposed rule and called for it to be withdrawn. So that's a big deal for an organization that is nonpartisan and that has to achieve consensus across 155 agencies. We urged the retention of the existing national program that was worked out in 2012, and we argued for a real and meaningful collaboration between EPA, all the state and local air agencies, California, industry, and other stakeholders to reach agreement. And if you want to go read our comments for yourself, there is a link to them right there in my slide. And go ahead, good luck typing that out yourself. You can also find them just on the NACA website. So a lot of what we see in this issue matters nationally and not just to California. So we've talked a bunch about California's waiver authority today, and I really appreciated the very thorough review that CARB and that others put into explaining the sort of policy environment that enables this. But California is not the only state that has skin in this game. California's authority is under Section 209 of the Clean Air Act, but there's another section of the Clean Air Act, Section 177, that allows other states to adopt California's standards. Now, they can't do it themselves. They can't go off and make a third or a fourth or a fifth or a 10th standard. They're either doing the federal standard or they're doing the California standard, and a number of states have chosen to do that. And I have put up a delightful map here that shows you some of the different jurisdictions that have chosen to do that. It includes 12 states that have adopted California's greenhouse gas standards, plus the District of Columbia. Colorado's moving towards being a 14th jurisdiction, and I've had conversations with state legislators in 3 other states who've asked me about exploring adding mirroring language or so-called deemed to comply language that enables these other jurisdictions to pick up California standards. And in addition, y'all know this better than I do, California has ZEV regulations, zero emissions vehicle regulation, and 9 of the other states have done that. And there are cities across the country that have also tried to incentivize and mobilize the ZEV market. So what this means is that this is, not only is this just not California, that there are other states and locals who are implicated in this decision very seriously, but in addition, it's a growing market. The trend on this thing is moving more towards California than away from it on a policy basis. Next, I'm going to talk just a little bit about the comments themselves. And essentially how NACA speaks is through our comments. We convene folks. Everybody has an opportunity to pull the emergency brake and say, we don't believe in this. We think this is not good. We'd like to change this. We come to, an end point where we are all speaking with effectively a national voice. And our comments raised a number of concerns about the rule. Because our comments are the basis for how we speak, I'm really going to focus on the issues that were raised in our comments, which focused on the proposed rule. And I've seen in the press, and other folks have seen, that since the rule was proposed, Administrator Wheeler and others have made little hints that there are going to be small changes from the rule, but I can't speak to what any of those changes. I can only talk about what we've seen. So my presentation will focus on the things that we saw in our comments going forward. So number one, what we're talking about is a greenhouse gas rule, first and foremost, the emission standards for greenhouse gas vehicles. For greenhouse gas emissions from light-duty vehicles. And so under this proposal, as CARB very effectively pointed out before, this proposal results in an increase in greenhouse gas emissions versus the 2012 rule that's in place. The transportation sector contributes at least 1/3, and in as many cases, 40% of the greenhouse gas emissions of the jurisdictions that are in NACA. And light-duty vehicles are a key component of that. They contribute 59% of all transportation-related U.S. CO2 emissions, and about 20% of the total U.S. CO2 emissions. So as a country, if we're moving towards a path of decarbonization, this rule moves us in a different direction than the 2012 existing rule did. It'll increase CO2 emissions by 83 million metric tons by EPA's own analysis, and it'll increase petroleum consumption by 500,000 barrels per day, which brings with it increased emissions, including of criteria pollutants. So the emissions that were analyzed in the EPA's rule, the criteria pollutant emissions of this nationally were not really analyzed. Like, not really at all. They were referred to, but there was no deep analysis on it. And EPA and NHTSA, of course, were not able to do any analysis of the public health harms that would certainly result from those increased criteria pollutant or air toxics emissions. So why that's troublesome is clean air in the United States is a success story. This is one of the best things we've done in this country since the 1970s, right? We are winning this fight. And the way that we're winning this fight is through, these state implementation plans and other mechanisms that make the air cleaner and drive unalloyed benefits to Americans everywhere. Areas of the country are depending on the reductions from the CARS rule to attain and maintain their health-based national ambient air quality standards. In this case, the reason why I mentioned that there wasn't a lot of analysis of petroleum production and why it's important that a half million additional barrels a day are being brought forward is that a lot of the air quality criteria pollutant and air toxics benefits arise from air pollution that results from fuel production and distribution. And I know California does have a hand in the game of fuel production and distribution, but a lot of other states do too, and those folks will suffer those impacts in their local jurisdictions as well. So that just demonstrates why this is not just a California problem. Also, any improvement in vehicle efficiency will reduce fuel demand, which reduces the emissions from that petroleum extraction, refining, and distribution, and emissions of some pollutants like sulfur dioxide are proportional to the amount of fuel consumed. So if you consume less, then less is being produced by the cars and less is being produced by the production. For a number of states, the reductions that were implied by the continuation of the 2012 rule, or the current rule, are already built into their state implementation plans. If we roll this back, they're going to have to change it. They're already approved in the SIPs for a lot of the states. So that's a difficulty. And secondly, for a number of regions, and we're still trying to figure this out. As I said, there wasn't a lot of analysis by EPA or NHTSA about how this would affect the criteria pollutant standards meeting status of different regions of the country. But some analysis that was recently done by an independent consultant highlighted that for about a dozen regions, maybe less, maybe more, it's about a dozen, that are not an attainment, this will extend their non-attainment. That analysis identified Baltimore, Washington, D.C., St. Louis, Missouri, Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Columbus, Ohio, Detroit, Michigan, Louisville, Kentucky, San Antonio, Texas, Doña Ana County in New Mexico, the Wasatch Front in Utah, Yuma, Arizona, and San Francisco and San Luis Obispo as having real questions about how long this delays their ability to meet these standards. And moreover, there are as many as 200 areas in 40 states that are within striking distance of not meeting the 70 parts per billion ozone standard for the National Ambient Air Quality standards. And it's not clear that this will push them. They're in the range between 75 and 70 parts per billion, and it's not clear that this will push them under, but it raises the question. This is not just a California thing. By the way, if y'all need to stop me at any time, either because I've said something interesting or because you don't understand my accent, that would be just fine, and please feel free to do that. So part of the problem with trying to do this analysis, part of why I'm making reference to independent consultants and the like, are that EPA and NHTSA didn't make available the new information and analysis that they used to base the claim that the rule is no longer appropriate and necessary. But we do know that circa the 2012 rule, that the technologies to meet that were actually all out in the marketplace. I know everybody's mentioning Tesla and other manufacturers of EVs, but a bunch of the technologies that are essential in meeting this standard are things you saw on the drive over here. Sky Active technologies, high compression direct injection engines, Atkinson cycle engines, new ways to get more power from smaller engines, including downspeed and downsized engines with new turbocharger designs, cylinder deactivation, variable transmissions, lightweighting, predictive cruise control. I mean, I could keep going on and on and on, but there's a ton of stuff that's out there in the marketplace today that drives cars towards compliance. And when we start looking out towards the 2026 end of the SAFE rule, we don't know what other technologies are going to be out there. But what I'm suggesting is it's not just Tesla. It's not just California. Finally, we find that there are real questions about the justification on the safety basis. We're not super sure that the analyses that were done about driving newer cars more will yield more safety with a lower gas price. And we're also bolstered in that regard by an internal July 2018 an EPA memo that suggested that, that in fact the rule would lead to more deaths and lower safety. So that's not super clear. I myself have not seen a really solid analysis of this, but the NHTSA analytic tools that were used to try and derive the safety numbers were not a tool that's been used in the past and not something that EPA has ever used. So it certainly raises a lot of questions and puts the idea of putting the analytic tools out for public view prior to the finalization of the rules in order for us to say whether this is good or bad. There are also a couple things that have to do with the waiver to California. I know California is not going to be open to the idea of taking a California-only deal on this. When y'all have been interacting with EPA and interacting on the national stage, there's never been so much as a breath of being pulled away from the other states that are depending on this and that are standing with you about this. That said, if the federal suggestion, which is mentioned somewhere, you know, as a minor point in a 1,200-page rule, is that perhaps they'd just leave the waiver in place for California and reject it for the other states, that creates all kinds of third car problems, which are disallowed in the plain text of the Clean Air Act language. So I'm not raising this for you because I know that California has no intention of doing that, but I am just raising that in case others are in the room thinking maybe California can figure out its waiver and the rest of the states can figure out something else for themselves. It's not allowed in the Clean Air Act. It's out of the bounds of the possible solutions. Finally, in EPA's analytics on this, they suggested 7 different scenarios with one preferred scenario. And NACA looked at all 7 alternatives and opposed all of them. So within the 7 alternatives that are in the proposed rule, there's not like a, well, this one's okay and we'll take it alternative. All the alternatives are worse than the status quo. Let me say one other thing as I draw towards conclusion. Although the 177 states are directly implicated, those 177 states, y'all will remember, are the 13 jurisdictions that use California's authority here. Although those are the ones that are directly implicated, the proposed SAFE rule will reduce clean air everywhere. The thing about cars is they drive places. They go everywhere, right? So a dirty car that leaves California and drives into Oregon or Nevada is going to have a negative health impact on Oregon or on Nevada or wherever it is. And a cleaner car that does so will not have that impact. So although I'm speaking a lot today about the so-called 177 states, this really does affect everybody all over the United States. NACA sees the Section 209 authority that's given to California not as a quirk of the Clean Air Act. It's a pillar of the Clean Air Act. It's a core piece of how we advance clean air and protect public health. And so on a states' rights basis, on an advancing public health basis, on a protecting clean air basis, we felt pretty comfortable opposing this rule. A cleaner, low-emissions transportation sector is essential to achieving state and local climate goals and to meet and sustain our federal health-based air quality standards. In conclusion, I'll say it's not just in California that y'all are asking. If we can't meet our standards by driving from the cost-effective options that are available in the transportation sector, are we going to go somewhere else to try and find those reductions? And across the country, the answer is yes. If we can't get these air quality improvements from transportation, we're going to go for other sources. We're going to need to. It's ambient air quality, and in order to meet those standards, we're going to need to go to stationary sources, area sources, and other sources to try and reduce the emissions from those folks. And that's not great policy when you overburden some aspects of the economy in their air pollution reduction requirements because it's easier. If you have cost-effective methodologies available to you in the transportation sector, it's not a winner strategy to walk away from it. The Clean Air Act overall has been a winning strategy, and so my hope is that that California and the other states represented and locals represented by NACA will prevail in talking folks out of walking away from a winning strategy. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thanks again for allowing me to participate in your meeting today.
Thank you, Miles. Do we have any questions? Guess we're good. Thanks,
Y'all are the
Miles.
best. Thank you.
And I just want to add, from the national perspective, it's great to hear from you, Miles, but I think it was just a reaction to the time that we put this together, because I think that the description that we heard from our state DOT, from our regional planning entities, from Tanisha, and don't be stealing Tanisha from California, okay? I think would apply to all of our state partners there too. So the absence of having the other part of the discussion, let's just put in quotations, and we'll move forward all of those similar comments to our other state partners and on a national region. I think that they too will have, I know they have to have regional transportation plans. We're not the only one that needs to do that. So all of the challenges we have, there are 35 states in the nation that have recently helped themselves with some form of transportation funding. We heard earlier today that all of our efforts around SB1 and the Road Repair and Accountability Act are subject to be basically on a timeout and not able to freely flow to the extent that we have an intersection with the federal requirements. So pretty far reaching, I think, for all of our partners. So with that, thank you, Miles. So any of the other folks on the dais wish to comment? Okay, we're good. So now we're going to move to next steps, and we'll ask our next panel, Jennifer, Krish, and Tanisha, to come back. We're going to call you back. Also, I want to remind the public we do have some speaker request cards. If you would like to speak, please make sure that you've filled out a card and given them to Doug. And we're going to ask you to organize your thoughts so that we can keep those brief to 2 minutes. So thank you very much. Okay, so I didn't do well with the lineup, but it says Jennifer's first, so has the team decided to bat in that order or a different order?
Sure.
We're going to stay? Okay, Jennifer.
You want us here or up there?
I think for recording purposes, we'd ask you to stand at the podium.
There we go. All right, next steps. Step 1 is fight. And that's what we're doing right now, fighting the rule. And this meeting has been a great example of us all working together and developing, a common position on the rule, and we need to continue doing that, reaching out to other partners both within the state and across other states, and lobbying the federal agencies and lobbying Congress. So fighting the rule is sort of part 1 of step 1. If that's not successful, we're prepared to litigate the rule if it's similar to what we think it's going to look like. And we're working with other states to join us in that potential litigation as well. So fighting the rule, either through our collective lobbying action or through litigation is step one. But if that's not successful, then step two is for us here in California to revisit our SIPs. And we will have to think about other measures that are necessary to make up the lost reductions from the federal rule. And that'll be a tough process. We'll have to update the rules, we'll have to update our modeling, and that's a long process. And we will need to get deep reductions, and from, we'll look to the transportation sector as well as other sectors. So fight, and then if we're not successful, revisit the SIPs.
Steps.
Okay, that's the next step. So Chris, let's
I think we've covered
I'd
that.
say Jennifer went to third, so you're going to bring her home, or that might have been a
I don't
home
know.
run.
Let's see where we
So
go
maybe you
here.
could say thanks, goodbye.
So I think, and I won't speak in fighting terms here, but I think the coordination with other states is really important. You just heard a really great presentation at the national level, what this means in terms of air quality. I would submit to you that a number of states really haven't absorbed this fully at the same conversation we're having here as to what the impact will be on their transportation programs in terms of their funding, their ability to deliver projects, what it means in terms of air quality conformity. We are working with those other states through our partners at AASHTO, the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials, to really reach out to them. We've had some limited feedback from them. They're thinking this through, trying to analyze what those impacts are, and I think based on the conversation we've had here today, I think we need to enlighten them a little bit further on what those impacts might be and give them kind of a broader perspective on that. More pragmatically, there really isn't a plan B here, to be perfectly blunt, but if this rule were to go in effect, I think we'd be scrambling to try to figure out what would happen, and so as part of that, we would be looking very diligently at all the program projects and trying to assess where the risks lie. Which projects truly would be at risk and would be subject to some amendments in the future that would stall them in some way, shape, or form. Recognizing what I said earlier, there are a number of triggers that require conformity determination, so trying to understand what those risks are for each project is a little bit complicated. Adding money to projects, by the way, is a risk. That triggers it. So, we need to figure that out, and that's relatively complicated. You heard about 2,000 projects, so, each one is unique in its own right. The other thing that we're certainly committed to do, and I know we tease Vince regularly, and he deserves it, but, we have a fantastic partnership with FHWA and US EPA when we work on this on a regular basis. Air quality conformity is quite complex. You don't hear a lot about it because it works really, really well in this state. There are folks behind the scenes working on this all the time to make sure we're meeting the intent of the Clean Air Act, to make sure that we're implementing the way the SIP is intended, that we're meeting those budgets at the regional levels, and that these projects are moving. You're only hearing about it now because a monkey wrench is being thrown into the works. And so I think we're committed to continue that partnership with US EPA and with FHWA. So when that rule, hopefully it doesn't come out, but if it does, we clearly understand and digest what the ramifications are, and so we can adjust accordingly.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, Tanisha.
Thank you. First, just a ditto to everything they said. I think all of that is true. What I would add to what they have said is that we need to be strong in our resolve to fight. This is huge, and we're not alone, and we need to reach out to our fellow MPOs. We've started talking with the National Association of Regional Councils, as well as AMPO, which is the Association of Metropolitan Planning Organizations, as well as other transportation agencies, and we need to continue to do that. As you've heard from the MPOs that have spoke before you today, as well as myself, we've already started reaching out to our congressional delegation to build our coalition. But I think we cannot forget our partners who are not in transportation. We have to talk to our trades. We have to talk to our industry. We have to talk to them so that they can understand the impacts, because it is a very technical process, and we have to demystify the technical and put it in terms that the average person can talk about and can relay to their congressional delegation as well as their membership. I think that's a very important piece. Continuation of the statewide collaboration that we have here today. This is a very good forum. We need to continue that discussion and continue as we move forward. As CARB faces their litigation, we should be partners in supporting them in their fight against this rule. We should also, we've talked about Vince in the back, but we need to continue trying to work with the feds. Even though they are not talking to us, we cannot be silent. They cannot not know that this is an issue in the state of California. And so I stand here today again as a partner with all of you in wrapping us up. And thank you for the opportunity to be here.
I think Vince is hiding. Okay,
Madam Chair?
okay,
Ma'am?
he had some other word. Yes, yes.
Can I say something? at this
Yes,
point?
of course, I think we'd
Since
like
we've
to.
had, since we're talking about next steps, I wanted to add to that. I think we've heard from so many wonderful agencies and speakers today to talk about all the negative impacts, but we need to take back the message and the framing of this issue. We need to stop calling this the safe rule and call it what it is. It's a rollback to dirtier and old standards. It's turning the clock back. It's the rollback rule. It's not the safe rule. In fact, Tanisha, I appreciate, you used a phrase, which is there's nothing safe about the safe rule. And I'll go further. It's not just not safe, it's hazardous. It's hazardous to our health. It's hazardous to our air quality. It's hazardous to our economic vitality and our technological innovation. It's hazardous to our transportation system. It's hazardous to housing security. It's hazardous to taxpayers and our pocketbooks. It's hazardous to states' rights. And it's hazardous to achieving equity. So I think we need to communicate about this to the public in ways that appeal to the public, not just sort of the detailed stuff that we know about, what I call the sort of in the ballpark, those of us in the ballpark understand what this language is, but we need to change the language to terms that the public understands, that this is hazardous to our quality of life and so many things that you've all talked about, and stop calling it the safe rule. Because by doing that, we play into the other side's framing. They were very thoughtful in coming up with that name. We can't fall into that. We need to be as thoughtful in framing it from our standpoint.
Good.
Okay, do we have any other comments from the dais? Yes, please.
Thank you, and boy, what great panels. Thank you all for coming, and thanks for coming the distance to participate. I want to talk a little about health, because that's behind all of this, and I think it's also another aspect of next steps, because yes, both of our agencies are involved in protecting the environment and providing mobility, but fundamental, particularly to ARB, it's the health and safety code. That's why we're here. And it's not just to support health, but to promote health. And thank you, John, for your comments about how dangerous this is. The Lung Association, and there's a letter I'm pleased that they submitted today that everybody should take a look at. But their annual, the 20th annual State of the Air report came out last month, and it celebrates progress that we've made over the last 20 years, and I think acknowledges the framework of the Clean Air Act that has allowed that to happen, that we have all worked under and prospered with. But one thing that it observes is this is the first year where there's been fallback, that instead of steady progress, and a long way to go, in fact, about 2/3 of the most 25 polluted cities from air quality standpoint did worse. And the report doesn't pretend to be able to explain that, but I think we've heard comments today, and everybody has to wonder about the role of climate change in that, and certainly for the Central Valley. The Central Valley experienced the worst ever measured air quality from particulate matter this fall. the worst PM 2.5 concentration ever. And I think everybody understands that that is the most dangerous piece of air quality to our public. Long-term exposure clearly increases your risk of cardiovascular death. And if you do choose to have a heart attack, please do not have it on a bad air day, because your outcome will be worse. And these are real numbers that I think people can get. You know, the excess deaths, premature deaths, annually, every year, for the state of California. Let me get that. You know, order of magnitude, we're talking 8,000, 9,000 deaths per year. These are preventable deaths. As a doctor, prevention, you know, this is important. This is why are we allowing this? And to put it in perspective, San Joaquin Valley, we're talking order of magnitude close to 1,500 all-cause mortality. You know, this is far in excess of the number of traffic accidents. This is far in excess of all the homicides that we have every year. For the South Coast, it's close to 5,000. For San Diego, it's close to 700. These are these are big numbers, real numbers, especially compared to other causes of death. And clearly, leveling out auto emissions in 2020 for the next 5 years, it will get worse. People are driving more miles. Population is increasing. Those numbers can't help but get worse. So it is so, I think health is another one of the next steps in terms of that's something that the public can understand a little more readily probably than conformity budgets, although when you say, well, I won't explain the details of conformity, but billions of dollars in transportation, that they get too. And Mr. Schmidt's comments, you know, yes, it's not just health, but it's the economy, and I'm thinking about the Valley. Well, what's our number 6 global export in the Valley? It's in agriculture, it's almonds. This is for the state. This is for the state. Number 6 global export, almonds, the Valley. But number 7 is electric vehicles. You know, if that doesn't highlight how successful our work has been, it's phenomenal. But yes, we have to think about how we find others to collaborate, how we get the message out, indeed nationally, because this will have national effects. Those most affected communities highlighted in the Lung Association State of the Air report. Yes, primarily it's the West, it's especially California, but it's names we're familiar with like Chicago and New York slip back. And so I think people will understand it, but that's only if we get the message out and make those connections. So thank you.
Thank you. And I think, you know, we hear loud and strong messaging is important, but Tanisha, I also love some of your visuals, and I think we need some really good visuals to help us communicate, because I do think that we can't stay in our lane and only use acronyms and complicated.
And not call it the safe rule.
Right, right.
The rollback rule.
It's not.
Hazardous rollback.
I like the go to
Hazardous
jail
rollback rule.
image, but no, I do think some
Set your parking brake.
simple pictures to help people understand how far-reaching this can be with our expanded unintended consequences, I would say. So with that, we have the public comments, and I'm going to ask to have 5 members queue up in a line so we can move through this efficiently and effectively. So if I could have Gretchen, followed by Carl, by Brian, Simone, and Patricia. And if I need to go to last names, I will, but my training's in the hospitality industry, and we go in first names. So there we go. And will you please tell us your
Of
full name
course.
and who you're representing to?
For the record. Gretchen
you.
Newsom, speaking on behalf of IBEW 569, representing over 3,000 electrical unionized workers in San Diego and Imperial counties. We are here to speak in strong opposition to Trump's administration's so-called safe rule. Maybe we should call it the slash rule. I'll get a little bit more creative later.
Let's take suggestions for, as everybody comes up, let's take suggestions for new names. How's that?
New names.
Name that right.
Slash roll, we'll write this down. Roll back,
I
roll.
will try not
Best
to
one
swear
wins,
as
right?
well.
Right.
Because I can think of a four-letter word as well that begins with the letter S. California's cutting-edge clean transportation programs are benefiting workers, local communities, and our economy. Through the statewide electric vehicle infrastructure training program, also known as EVITP, electricians throughout California are advancing their skills, gearing up to build the charging infrastructure needed to support California's goal of 5 million zero-emission vehicles by 2030. In fact, IBEW electricians are already here at work in San Diego installing charging stations for zero-emission cars, transit buses, and even commercial trucks, one of the first projects of its kind in the entire country. These good union jobs are possible because of California's leadership. As the future of our climate, our health, and California's clean transportation economy hangs in the balance, we must not let the Trump administration roll back progress, and California must fight back. We urge the Air Resources Board and the California Transportation Commission to resist and to oppose in every way possible this attempt by President Trump and his cronies of climate deniers to undermine California's climate leadership and legal authority to protect our public health. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, Carl?
Good afternoon. My name is Carl Aldinger, and I'm here today representing the Sunrise Movement, a youth-led climate action group which has been, in many ways, responsible for a worldwide conversation about a Green New Deal and increased scrutiny about the dangerous inaction of governments around the world. The California Air Resources Board has been responsible for the world's first action against pollution, including CARB's insistence that Californians be the first in the world to adopt unleaded gasoline, and then catalytic converters, and on and on. CARB forced the world to believe zero-emission vehicles were possible before anybody else was willing to do it, created the landscape for the first wave of battery electric vehicles of the late 90s and early 2000s. But when CARB lost its way and rolled back ZEV rules in deference to the mythical hydrogen highway, the manufacturers quickly dumped these designs, with General Motors literally crushing their EV1 cars as if to erase their existence. CARB has brought back zero-emission rules, and auto manufacturers once again were forced to do the hard work of designing competitive cars that don't rely on gasoline or diesel. It is not an overstatement that the California Air Resources Board has done more to prevent the pollution and greenhouse gas emissions of the world's vehicles than any other regulatory body, bar none, always leading the EPA. CARB in California may be compared to Joan of Arc, Simone Boulevard, or Greta Thunberg, who today is on the cover of Time magazine as the face of the new youth movement demanding radical action. As Greta Thunberg has told us, we cannot solve a crisis without treating it like a crisis. All of these were accidental leaders who were swept up in a just struggle. So thank you, CARB. Sunrise understands the urgency to transition to increased mass transit, increased bicycle usage here in our city, and electrification of our vehicles. Fighting for slow, increased mileage for gasoline and diesel-powered vehicles is actually an outdated battle.
Okay, Carl, you're getting the hook.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Susan, for keeping me on time. So, Brian.
Good afternoon, Commissioners and Board members. I am Brian Tomasovic, Senior Deputy District Counsel with the South Coast Air Quality Management District. Our district has the worst ozone air quality in the nation. Despite our progress, we simply cannot attain the ozone standards unless we transition vehicles to cleaner technologies. The so-called SAFE proposal is a giant leap in the wrong direction, and it would directly threaten our ability to attain. We submitted more than 70 pages of objections on the proposal, sounding alarm on the air quality impacts and rejecting its claims on consumer demand and availability of advanced technologies. With my limited time, I would like to highlight a key issue. The agencies try to justify their proposal on the theory that it will save lives, but the agencies have no authority to consider risks to safety beyond those posed by the design of a new vehicle or new emission control device used to meet new vehicle standards. The proposal claims it will reduce driving and thereby reduce accident fatalities over the next 50 years. Even if this were true, the benefits would be dwarfed by an estimated 32,000 premature deaths from increased air pollution. Basic public health science points to these costs, but this is being ignored in favor of agency conjecture that people would drive less with the rollback. We support many fellow stakeholders' technical criticisms of the agency's models and analysis, but it also doesn't matter whether the agency's models are correct because Congress has never authorized the agencies to set or freeze standards with this unprecedented kind of safety claim. And if you think about it, the agency's approach simply makes no sense. If Congress meant an agency to refrain from setting a standard because it may cause increased driving, that is the rebound effect, the agency could never set a standard, which is the exact opposite of Congress's intent. No wonder the agencies have never before used such a specious argument to try to justify rolling back protections. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this important issue today.
That is perfect timing, so, yeah, there we go. Okay, Simon, and then Patricia. I'm having trouble with my batting lineup, but let's do that.
Hi, I'm Simon Mui with Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC, representing over 3 million members and activists. I help direct our work in the U.S. West on clean vehicles and fuels. I've got some additional bad news to add, unfortunately, and hopefully we'll end on a good note, but these federal rollbacks are actually one part of a larger federal rollback on all the programs within the Clean Air Act. The Clean Air Act today contains many health protective standards to air quality throughout the 50 states. And to date, if we go through and count the rollback of the federal clean car standards is a very important rule. And on top of that, the administration is rolling back, stopping enforcement, or weakening or attempting to weaken over 20 rules under the Clean Air Act, including things like the National Clean Power Plan, mercury and air toxic standards, rules governing volatile organic compounds and methanes from oil and gas wells. So this is one rule we're talking about today, and we're starting to see these connections not only within air, within transportation, but across the whole range of emissions. And that's a critical problem because the Clean Air Act, if you look at all the policies underneath it, for California, this year we estimate the avoidance of 40,000 premature deaths from those combined policies under the Clean Air Act. We're talking about health benefits. That means tens of thousands of cases of avoided heart attacks, respiratory illnesses, hospital admissions, asthma, ER visits. Those savings are over $400 billion annually in emissions. So I will say that this attack on our waiver, on our clean car standard is unprecedented, but all of you today are uncovering the veil of what is happening. And we urge you to continue your work to protect California's interest on state authority and federal preemption, and the arc of history is with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Okay, we're going to have Patricia up next, but I would like Joyce, Jack, Tom, and Catherine to queue up in our queue line, please. Patricia.
Good morning. This is Patricia Chen with LA Metro, and I want to say that we are very concerned about the SAFE rule, and I have coworkers who are working very hard on that, and unfortunately, they were not able to be here today. And I don't know that we have so much a position as many questions about what can be done on this, and we really appreciate this workshop today and this gathering of people, and I look forward to having the opportunity to ask many questions after the workshop. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Joyce?
Thank you. My name is Joyce Lane, and I'm here representing San Diego 350 and also Bay Area 350. And we are organizations very concerned about preventing the worst impacts of climate change and climate injustice. And we are very concerned about this issue today because the health of Californians is at stake. In San Diego, we have the sixth worst air quality in California. I mean, in the nation, sorry. We urge you to use every tool in your toolkit to fight this rollback of this waiver from the Trump administration and their efforts to undermine California's leadership and authority to protect our environment and our health. But while the Trump administration is working to limit California's ability to regulate emissions, he can't take away our ability to build our communities and provide people with sustainable choices for getting around. Whether or not the federal ruling is made, the state and the regions can invest in transit and active transportation options. We must reduce the number of vehicles on the road and vehicle miles traveled. To do that, we have to get people out of their cars and improve transit as well as active transportation options. San Diego especially is woefully behind in developing a meaningful transit plan, and we have a new executive director of SANDAG who has a great visionary plan, and we would like to see more of that. We are, as people have mentioned, we're in climate change. We're in a climate crisis. And we'd like to see CARB and the California Transportation Commission doing more, like the phase-out of gas-powered cars and trucks, the phase-out of fossil fuel extractions, and a statewide mandate for transit. The threat by the Trump administration to roll back the emission waiver is a reason to double down on these kinds of solutions. We would also like to see more public participation. We know that Californians are very concerned about this effort, so what is the plan for that, to involve those Californians to fight back this effort? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Jack?
Good afternoon. Jack Hsu with the Cleveland National Forest Foundation. Thanks for coming down to San Diego again and making yourselves available to us here in San Diego, the other part of Southern California. But last night I was at an event in which we had a discussion of, are we dealing with a moment or are we dealing with a movement? Well, with regards to this moment about this terrible rollback of hazardous standards, I think it's obvious. We're going to fight. We're going to fight because this is important towards our health and the standards that we have set up. So I think that's pretty clear, and I applaud you for bringing that fight to us and for us to be able to comment and support you in that fight. But I also want to talk a bit about the movement. And I'm not talking about moving cars or anything. I'm talking about a movement like the Civil Rights Movement. I'm talking about a movement like the Green New Deal movement. The science is real clear. We need to convert to electric cars, but that's not enough. We really can't build any more roads. We cannot expand our road system in California anymore. We need to change our allocations and priorities and move to alternative forms of transportation. That's real clear, and we need leadership in that regard. The NPOs need help. SANDAG needs help, because it's a huge transition that we're about to partake in. And much of our communities, much of our other leaders certainly in San Diego and other parts of California, don't get it yet. They haven't read the memos. And so we need leadership to tell them that, hey, those days are over, and we need a new vision. Now, in transportation, we used to have a vision in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and I know what that vision looked like. It was a network of freeways all over. That is gone. We need a vision of other transportation networks throughout California. Please promote that vision and the truth to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom?
Good afternoon. I'm Tom Jordan with the San Joaquin Valley Air District. The San Joaquin Valley, along with South Coast, have two of the most challenging air quality situations in the country, and that's at least part of the reason why California has the waiver authority to begin with, along with the state's technical expertise. Very recently, the Valley Air District and the State Air Resources Board adopted a plan to show how we would attain the PM 2.5 standard, small particulate matter. That plan calls for billions of dollars to accelerate the implementation of new technologies on the transportation sector to clean the air. So this is a time for acceleration of reductions. The federal rule rolling back reductions is going in the wrong direction. The district actually petitioned the federal government to do a new national standard for heavy-duty vehicles. I think it's important to recognize the role that the California waiver has played to make sure there's continued pressure to move for stricter federal standards. So uncertainty as far as the waiver goes will hurt our efforts to continue to push the nation forward for standards that we need, not only on the light-duty side, but also on the federal side. Also, I think the transportation people have talked about it today to some extent already, but these reductions that are being dealt with and potentially rolled back are already baked into the cake for our air quality plans and for everyone else's plans. So rolling them back is going to lead to quite a bit of uncertainty. Given where we're at with our air quality situation, we don't have reductions sitting on a shelf waiting to be plugged in if we lose other emission reductions. We're looking for every pound we can get. So if we lose a pound, there's not a way to directly replace that. And that has ripple effects, not only in the air quality world, but in the transportation world, that we can't entirely see where that's going to end up. Also, you know, for the manufacturers and others, I mean, there's plans have been made, you know, based upon these regulations, and this uncertainty is not going to be helpful. So we definitely support, you know, California's efforts to make sure those reductions continue to happen.
Thank you. Okay, behind Catherine, who's going to come next, I'd like Nalimi, Janice, Jacqueline, and Malika. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Catherine Garcia, Policy Advocate for Sierra Club, California. And on behalf of our chapter, which includes 400,000 members and supporters statewide, thank you for hosting this workshop on the potential impacts of federal vehicle standards rollback. We're grateful for California's strong air pollution standards and decades of leadership. California's Clean Cars program is vital for protecting public health and is a model for the United States and worldwide. Thank you for resisting the federal government's attack on clean cars and threat to California's authority. California's waiver to enact stricter emission standards is one of the most important policies to combat air pollution and climate change. As the climate crisis intensifies, cleaning up air pollutants will become even more challenging. Washington's attempt to undermine our efforts on clean air is out of step with what every survey indicates Californians want: clean air. Californians are counting on strict reductions of toxic emissions. Our children are demanding fewer bad air days so they can play outside, and the next generation deserves a healthy planet. Sierra Club urges CARB and the CTC to continue fighting this federal threat to clean air in California. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Milimi. Let me make a check.
Hi, thank you for having me. And I am the Assistant Director of the Energy Policy Initiative Center at the University of San Diego. And we've been working on local climate action plans for a very long time. So I wanted to make the connection between the rollback of these standards and climate action plans, because climate action plans rely on these reductions in order to achieve and be consistent with state targets. And not only that, sometimes climate action plans are CEQA documents, and that means that projects that rely on the climate action plans will also be affected. So we can't be suing under CEQA for something we can't be controlling. And so just wanted to say that in our region, nearly all cities have climate action plans, and many of them are CEQA documents. And so I would want to say that this is something to please remember when you're going ahead and fighting for this, you know, to stop the rollback, and that without these standards, it will be very difficult for cities to help achieve the standards that the state is wanting to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, Janice?
Good afternoon. My name is Janice Luna Reynoso. I am a National City resident, and I'm here speaking on behalf of Mothers Out Front. We're a climate justice organization that focuses on mothers, grandmothers, and other caregivers to shape an equitable, and livable climate today for our children and future generations. We welcome you here to America's finest city, and some of us are even blessed enough to call this beautiful native Kumeyaay land, known as San Diego, our home, but not all of us have the same benefits, and a lot of us, like in communities such as National City and similar communities, are dealing with a lot of health inequities. I mean, I literally have the 805 freeway right behind the fence of my backyard. This is very common in National City, whether it's the 805, the 5 freeway, the 54, the 125 that surrounds us. So I am here speaking on behalf of myself and my community to oppose Trump and his administration's unsafe proposal, because not only will it roll back our efforts in California to address climate change, but also it threatens the health of our children and our communities. In National City, 60% of our greenhouse emissions come from transportation and gas emissions. The exposure to this greenhouse gas, more often than not, sends our children to the emergency rooms where they're diagnosed with asthma. This is at a higher rate than other places in the county. So imagine how nice it would be for community members to have less toxins coming from those cars that are driving through our backyards. Trump's unsafe proposal benefits the fossil fuel industry, which is an extractive industry and economy that we need to move away from. We need to set standards and regulatory measures that will move us forward into the regenerative green economy that supports a skilled workforce, but also benefits the health of our children, all of our children, and even our own health. We owe it to our children and our future generations a safe, livable planet, opposing Trump's unsafe proposal in a step towards this goal.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jacqueline?
Hello. I am here to represent a community of folks that I see absent here, which seems to be the youth. I'm 21 years old. I'm obsessed with the meditativeness of city traffic. It's not meant to be beautiful or calming, but I've lived my life behind the 805 freeway. I don't deserve to potentially die younger because of my lack of wealth, but at the same time, I can squint my eyes and pretend I have an ocean view sunset. The sounds of 75 miles per hour in ocean waves sometimes sound the same. Maybe I won't die younger. Maybe my life will be expanded by the calming whoosh that pulls me into a meditative state, combating my respiratory stress to give me sweet San Diego breaths. Clean air shouldn't have to be a meditation dream, but it's all I got. Isn't it important to make clean air a reality? What is being spoken is spoken with urgency. Hear me out like I'm a person who is speaking to you like my life depends on it, because it does. I oppose Trump's administration's unsafe proposal because my community and every community like mine will suffer. Every pillar of our health will suffer. Trump's unsafe proposal, ruining my life proposal, whatever you want to call it, I can't see through the thick greenhouse gas emissions the long, healthy life I wish to live. The American dream that was promised to me and my grandmother, a hardworking immigrant asked by the U.S. government to work in exchange for the key to this dream, the Bracero program of 1942. With this rollback proposal, I see a healthy, long life robbed from me. I see myself becoming a clean air refugee. The home I was raised in, my mother was raised in, the home I wish to raise my children in, that home behind the 805 freeway, our American dream will become our death trap, our death sentence if we stay in the conditions we are in now. From the context of my life I've shared, I've shown regulations and politics do not care about me, lives like mine do not matter, our dreams and our hopes. But I am here to show opposition because every cell in my body wishes to live a healthy, long life. I've shared my fears with you all and the context of my life, hoping that you carry a piece of this with you to make an impact moving forward, not backward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I acknowledge something? Fran, can I acknowledge something?
Yes,
I just want to say, you may be one of the only young people here today, but you're not alone. At our Air District meetings in the Bay Area, and I know across this state, there's so many young people coming and speaking out. So really, you represent many others. So thank you for really coming and stepping out and participating today.
Thank you.
All righty, so we have Malika and then Kiana. I'm going to ask you to queue up, and that's the last request I have. So we go, Malika.
Hello, I'm Malika Marzin with Climate Action Campaign. This last February, Climate Action Campaign released the 3rd edition Climate Action Plan Report Card, a comprehensive report on climate action plans and implementation in the San Diego region. The report found that no cities are receiving the gold standard for climate action, with cities struggling to implement key strategies and meet their greenhouse gas emission goals. Which means when we zoom out, we as a region are not on track to meet regional and state greenhouse gas emission targets, and thus we as a region are not on track to secure a safe and livable future. And so the last thing we need to do is to go backwards, which the federal vehicle standards rollback would do. Specifically, this proposal would harm 2 key climate strategies that cities already struggle with: creating transit-friendly communities and ensuring that communities on the front lines of pollution and climate change are the first to benefit from climate solutions. Today, we strongly urge the Air Resources Board and California Transportation Commission to do everything possible to oppose this proposal and to lead on climate action at a time when bold action is more urgent than ever. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate that. Kiana.
Good afternoon, commissioners and board members. Kiana Valentine, I'm the Executive Director of Transportation California. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan coalition of business and labor that has united to advocate for solutions to improve our transportation system, grow our economy, and enhance quality of life in California. Clearly, the proposed unsafe rule, the he shall not be named rule, the hazardous rule,
You were just as good at CSAC on this.
Thank you. Would have far-reaching hazardous impacts on all of those vital goals. We have spent a lot of time talking today about the impacts to air quality, the environment, our transportation infrastructure. And the comment I'm about to make should not come at the expense of those. I think all of these priorities are equally important. But what I don't want to get lost in the conversation is the impacts to well-paying middle-class jobs and the construction industry that supports our economy. I'm not an economist or a statistician, so I should be careful not to get too out in front of my skis here. But if SB1, which invests $5 billion annually into our transportation infrastructure, created 68,000 jobs, and this unsafe proposed rule would inhibit our ability to spend $130 billion by a back-of-the-envelope calculation, we're putting at risk hundreds of thousands middle-class, good-paying jobs. In terms of next steps, I agreed with all of the recommendations from your stellar panelists. To Tanisha's point, I was made aware of this proposal about a month ago, but it was explained to me in highly technical terms, and I just didn't get it. And I'm a, relatively educated person in this line of business. I got a briefing from your great staff and from CalCog a couple days ago, and I said, oh boy, okay, this is serious, and we need to understand it in the real impacts, the ways it's going to impact our everyday lives. My last comment, because I know we're out of time, is that our collective advocacy is vital. I am trying to help organize the industry's response to this. Please consider us a partner in your efforts to oppose this proposed rule. We will keep you apprised of our efforts as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, appreciate it. Okay, comments from my fellow colleagues at the DI. Yes, Commissioner Kehoe.
Thank you, Fran. I just want to, first of all, thank the staffs of the California Transportation Commission and the Air Resources Board for putting together expert speakers that really shed a lot of light on the impacts that this so-called unsafe rule is going to have on our economy, on our health, and on our environmental concerns and clean air quality. I think the good side of this hearing was many of us appear to be on the same page. We understand these impacts are going to be highly negative, really rolling back 50 years of California policy that has made significant positive change in our pollution, our air pollution. And it's clear that we have to speak with one voice and really draw a line in the sand. The unfortunate part is we don't know how this rule is going to roll out, when, and I think it's a
very cynical ploy on the part of the administration, but we've seen it before. So let's stay united and hang in there and speak with one voice to the public, to the media, and to our elected officials. And I particularly want to thank the San Diegans who stayed and added your thoughts to this very important discussion. I see longtime friends and really dedicated citizen activists, and I so much appreciate your time today and your input. You know, we do so much need to speak out on this and let our government know at the local, county, state level, the federal level, and let our friends and families know. So thank you for hanging in there and participating.
Okay, do we have any other questions?
Yeah, I really appreciate all those who stayed, the speakers, the public comments, as well as the great panelists we've had. And I think what we've heard, this is not just a California issue, this is a national issue. What we heard is this is not a liberal or conservative issue, this is a nonpartisan issue. And I think what we heard is that this affects all aspects of quality of life here across this country. So the more we can, as others have said, speak with a single voice and really get beyond this being just sort of a partisan battle, although unfortunately the Trump administration has tried to make this about fighting California or making this very partisan, we're successful if we characterize this, as I said earlier in my comments, something that really hurts all aspects of our society and our life. And appeal on arguments that are not just about air quality and environment and equity, but about economy, taxpayer, wise use of funds, remaining a world leader on technology and innovation. So I think we have a great story to tell to the broader public, and I know all of you here are ambassadors on that, so thanks.
Okay, anybody else?
I just want to add to the chorus of thank yous. Thank you to everyone who came and made comments. I will get it closer.
Good.
Thank you to our colleagues at the Air Resources Board for making the trek down to joining this workshop with our May meeting. Thank you very much. Thank you for all of our speakers.
Okay, with that, I will also add my thank you, a special thank you to Tanisha. I think you probably were the rainmaker that got us all together. So I want to encourage everybody to do what Jennifer and Tanisha and others have done, work on both sides, work in transportation, work across all of these opportunities, because we're really better with that. And I think in terms of speaking with one voice, it's important, but I think we need to speak to folks in the language they understand. So we have to get out of our acronym soup and the complicated worlds that we all, and let's keep it simple, you know? And I remain convinced that this slash rule, I have to give my vote for the slash rule name, I have to tell you.
We're still taking suggestions.
And, you know, I kind of live my life looking forward. I do better driving forward than I do backing up. I do better walking forward. California, it prides itself on being innovators, and I think it's better for all of us to move forward together and not move backwards. So with that, Mary, do you want to
Thank you. Thank you very much. We've heard a lot today about the rollbacks, and also I think about what maybe at least have not quite been anticipated consequences of the rollback, which really doesn't appear to benefit much of anybody, with the possible exception of those who want to keep us dependent on oil. There really is not much that can be said about this that's good. As the representative of the agency, which has been the tip of the spear on this issue, if you will, and will continue to be out there on the front lines of the battle, it's great for us to hear from the public and to hear from so many people who are joining us and who are lifting their voices and saying eloquently what sometimes we say in more bureaucratic language. So that's been enormously heartening and well worth a trip to Sacramento, to San Diego from Sacramento, I should say. I do have to say that the consequences are dire, as we've heard, and the alternatives that we face are extreme. We try not to, engage in language that's too colorful sometimes because of the fear of maybe seeming not to be as serious about these things as we should. But the fact is that if we don't have the ability to continue to move forward with our transformation to cleaner cars, we will be faced with dramatic alternatives in terms of tighter, stricter controls on everything else, including movement of vehicles, and potentially looking at things like fees and taxes and bans on certain types of vehicles and products. And these are not things that most of us think are the right way to go. In fact, even at the same time that we're having this big battle, we are spending as a state hundreds of millions of dollars if you add up greenhouse gas reduction money from the cap and trade fund, if you look at the incentive funds that the voters have put in over the years in order to create incentives to turn over the fleet, to bring in zero emission vehicles at a wide array of new technologies. So we can, at the same time we're contemplating this horrible development, we continue to move on. We're not going to stop working on this. We're going to keep on fighting, but also keep on doing everything we can to be part of a worldwide movement towards cleaner transportation, which is where we all know we need to go. And so we thank all of those who are standing with us, and I'm sure we will be back again talking about these issues before too much longer. So once again, thanks to everybody, and I will now officially close the workshop. Thank you.